Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Personal Responsibility Lawyer Podcast. I'm Michael Lovins of the law firm Lovins Trosclair, which is the sponsor of this show. And we help people who have been harmed by someone else's irresponsible acts. To the extent there's a unifying theme on this podcast, it is about taking personal responsibility for our lives, our actions, our choices, and of course the outcomes of all of those things. But no one is born knowing what it really looks like to take personal responsibility for their own lives in the real world. It's a process, and it develops best when we have people who invest in our lives and teach us the way, or perhaps a better way to say it is that they show us the way. This brings me to my guests on today's episode. I have with me today Craig Dirksen and Carol Blosser, who are two dynamic and inspiring people. And I'm not saying that because they're sitting across the table from me. I'm saying that because that's why I wanted to have them on the show. They're also two of the co-founders of the Waterloo School in Austin, which is a brand new high school in my hometown. And I'm very excited to have you all on the show to talk about not just Waterloo, but a lot of the concepts that are behind Waterloo. So thank you guys for coming on, and welcome to the program.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thanks for having us.
So, first of all, we can, I think, establish pretty quickly out of the gate that Waterloo is not a high school that's like what most people think a high school is going to be when they think of a high school. It's a different model. Why did we need, we've been doing high schools for 100, 150 years, however long, with the model that we have now. Why did we need something different?
Excellent question. I think the shortest answer is there has been a whole lot of social and technological change in a very short period of time. And at the same time, there have been social changes, particularly as it relates to college and college preparation and admissions. And if you look at what our students are doing in high school, in the typical American high school, on one level, it looks pretty much probably like what you and I did. But the reality is that their experience is very different than what ours was. And if we look at it from the simple perspective that we're trying to prepare them for adulthood, the reality is we're not doing a very good job. If you look at, you can look at it from a number of different perspectives, but helping kids get into adulthood from adolescence. We've all heard the jokes about the extended adolescence going into the 20s or 30s. We have some people saying, hey, this is a good thing. You know, if adolescence is about finding yourself, you just have more time to find yourself. But if we look at it from our perspective, a true flourishing person is an adult, and what we're doing is kind of holding kids back from getting there because we're doing things the way that used to work, used to fit within a culture, but as our culture has changed, it has a diminishing return.
And I think in our own teaching and administrative experience, we were seeing increasing numbers of kids getting into their 20s and just being lost. I mean, our 20s have always been a time to find yourself, but these kids were lost, and they were entering into an economy that was way more uncertain than anything that we had gone into when we were their age. So we realized that something was pretty wrong.
And so you referenced that you guys have been in education for a while, and I think that's important for people to understand. You guys didn't just wake up one day and say, hey, let's start a high school. You've been in education most, if not all, of your professional careers. Do I have that right?
That is correct. My first year in education was in 1992, teaching in Southern California in a public school, and between direct teaching or administration or working with youth organizations, I've been in the field of education ever since.
And I started my teaching when I was in graduate school at the University of Texas at Austin. I was a graduate student instructor, and then after I got my PhD, I ended up teaching in high school, private secondary school.
And what subjects did y'all teach?
Oh, what haven't we taught?
Carol taught just about anything that was left over after we had given everyone else their assignments.
Except for math. I don't teach math.
English is my background. I have also taught history, philosophy, theology, and rhetoric.
And I taught English, history, rhetoric, and journalism.
And Dr. Blosser, you have your PhD from UT at Austin?
Yes, I do.
And what is that in?
It is in English Renaissance literature.
Okay.
super
I knew it was
applicable.
something in super what?
Super relevant to everyday life.
Well, we'll get to that
Okay.
because I think one of the ideas that I haven't heard you address that directly. But I think one of the ideas behind Waterloo is that it is relevant to real life, if not the subject matter itself, the processes by which you dive into the subject
Yes,
matter.
absolutely.
So we now know that, okay, so the education system isn't necessarily meeting the needs of the kids who are coming through it. What is the Waterloo system that you have developed or are developing, and where did you come up with it?
So to kind of go back to the question of the system that we have doesn't meet kids' needs, I think one of the things that's striking, and I think as each person discovers where we got and when we got the way that we do school, particularly at the high school level, there's a little bit of surprise, alarm, and not a bit of, really? Andrew Carnegie and a bunch of industrialists went over to Central Europe to figure out how to create a workforce that would be super efficient and responsive to management and move on the bells. And yet that is actually, and if you think about what our school looks like, we make sure that kids sit in rows. We have the teacher, the role of the teacher really is a manager. I'm going to give you your assignment, whether it's a school assignment or preparing you for a work assignment. You're going to deliver it uniformly, consistently, efficiently back to the teacher. Everybody's going to have the same standards. Anyone's individual contributions really need to somehow fit and conform into the mode of conformity and homogeneity, regardless of the individual differences, skills, passions, and potential that each student has. And so it worked really well, particularly as we were industrializing as a country in the late 19th century, early 20th. We took a lot of those industrial modes of management and running companies out of the factories and into the rest of our business. So you still have people sitting in cubicles and rows and receiving their managerial orders and marching them in conformed perfect efficiency. That model of doing work and that model of doing school, if we think about it, part of what we're seeing in the disruption of Silicon Valley is not just the technology, but even the assumptions about how we do business, how we actually work, how much creativity and autonomy, how much can we give ownership to our employees to create value and things for us. And so when you look at it from that vantage point, you very quickly say, oh, wait, we need to fundamentally undo some really basic ways that we do school. And so that really led to one of the pieces, which I think also is fair to say has become always a pinch point with teaching, which is the schedule. We teach 6 or 7 subjects a day, 45 to 55 minutes. There's a bell in between. There's a passing period, and we march the kids through that schedule day after day after day. In a typical 45, 50-minute period, you have 5 to 10 minutes to get kids transitioned from the drama and social fun of the passing period and whatever happened at Billy's locker. You have to undo the upset about the Spanish test that they just took or the history discussion that went crazy in the last couple classes, and kids have to share those stories. And then you've got 30 minutes to present your lesson, and 45 to 50 minutes are amenable to lecture. So you deposit it, kids scribble down writing. They're not learning anything, but they are taking in the information. And then you have 10 to 15 minutes to answer questions, discuss, maybe do a little bit of activity before everybody closes their books 5 minutes before the bell because they're ready to go, standing by the door with their backpacks. And then you do it again in the next subject. And you have another group of kids coming in. And so the result of that is kids get to the end of the day, 3 o'clock, 3:30, and they've got all of the learning to do. They received all the information during the school day. Now I got to learn it. And so they have 2 or 3 or 4 hours of homework trying to get that through. So the first innovation, and I'll just kind of drop this there and let Carol kind of unpack it, is to acknowledge we don't learn that way. We can take in information that way. We don't learn that way. We don't work that way. And so we still need to cover a lot of subjects. There's a number of different subjects that we want to cover. We still want to meet that. But instead of doing that all at once, let's divide and conquer. Fewer things more thoroughly. And so we're dividing the school year into trimesters. And each trimester, they're taking 2 full credits. So they're only studying 2 subjects at a time. So for 12 weeks at a time, it might be math and English. The next trimester, it might be history and a language. And so that you have the ability to study one thing before lunch, another thing after lunch. You get more time in. You're going to have to work through issues of focus and attention that our current schedule allows us to kind of gloss over. I don't really have to pay attention to anything that long. The model, we relied significantly on an organization called Independent School Management, which is a consulting firm that is very data-driven in their analysis of what is good and what's not. And one of the things they said is the schedule most people use isn't very good. There are a number of innovations or different kinds of schedules that are better for learning. One of the core things is creating longer periods of time for students to be able to go deeper, do more activities with the learning, not just listening in a lecture. And so that became kind of one of the core structural changes around which we've been able to build our program.
And also one of the side effects of the traditional system is that, if you have biology at 11 and Spanish at 2, it creates the false misconception that knowledge is isolated. So any learning that does take place in that time period is completely disconnected from whatever else you're learning in the course of the day. So when we redesigned the schedule and redesigned courses, we wanted to help kids see that all knowledge is interconnected, right? In real life, in the workplace, you have to encounter new situations, come up with new solutions and new ideas by synthesizing what you know from all different kinds of areas. So in changing the schedule and in redesigning the courses, we can help them see that all knowledge is interconnected. And it's also just kind of more fun and interesting to learn that way.
It seems like one of the ironies of the industrial model is that it was designed for, I think, efficiency and uniformity.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
It got uniformity to at least a great extent, but the schedule itself is self-defeating for efficiency. Do you have any idea why? I mean, there's so many people looking at our education system. I mean, it's always a hot political topic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Why is no one looking at the inefficiency of the schedule? Do we have any idea?
No, it's a good question. I think one of the pieces to it, and this is the interconnectedness of our education system, really has to do with college admissions. So colleges, as the Committee of 10's recommendations for how we're going to do school standardized and created some uniformity in the high school program, you had college admissions that really conformed their admission standards, saying, okay, well, given the students are going to come through with a schedule, we're going to say you need 3 years of math, 3 years of science, 4 years of history, whatever their requirements are. And that becomes a little bit of a tail that wags the dog of, well, this is the easiest way for us to actually march through this and say, did you take enough math? Did you study enough science? Forget how much you learned. That actually isn't part of the equation.
Did you cover
That's
it?
harder to measure. What's easy to measure is what we cover. And I think that is a piece to it. I think our measurement, when we can look at how can I evaluate what we are accomplishing, it's a lot easier. We'll know it even in the work. It's a lot easier to say this is what I was doing as opposed to what did I accomplish.
Right.
And so I think that part of what has happened with school is the ability to easily measure what classes have you taken, what subjects have you covered in those classes, is just easier to measure. And so it becomes harder to say how do I actually break out of this.
Real quickly, you mentioned the Committee of 10. I have been aware of what the Committee of 10 means for, looking at my watch, 12-ish hours. Literally. What's the Committee of 10? I was pretty stunned when I heard about this.
I'm not a big historian on this piece, but it really is they're in looking at how do we in the late 19th century, how are we going to improve the quality of high school graduates that are kind of workforce ready in the late 19th century. It was a group of industrialists who looked at where are the industries most efficient, where are they working, how do they do that, and that's where a lot of the elements of the Prussian system of education that was very uniform and regimented. That's where their recommendations, a lot of them came from, that they brought into the American public school system.
It's pretty remarkable how this Committee of 10 nobody now has heard of. Even those of us here who have heard of it, I can't name any of the people who are actually on it. I don't think. But they almost unilaterally designed the system that we still, for the most part, use. I mean, we've tinkered around the edges of it.
Yeah, well, and I think part of what we have to remember too is that period of modernizing culture and society. I think there are a lot of things that happened at that point that no one necessarily, I'm guessing they didn't expect their creations to be the thing that the kind of the tail that wagged the dog of education. But as we moved towards creating what are these standards and norms that we as a modern society are going to have, I think they ended up with because it was such a significant time of cultural and technological change, they ended up having a more significant long-term establishing the direction that we're going as a society.
And I think it's also important to note that when they established that system, which did, to be fair, work for a very long time, there were lots of other institutions in society that were helping to raise kids, right? You had closer-knit communities, you had churches. So the school wasn't wholly responsible for the entire formation of a child. That was the family's responsibility, right? The schools had a very clear-cut mission, which was to create citizens and raise adults into the workforce. And I think that for those purposes, it did pretty well for a long time, and in many ways still does. But the situation we find ourselves in now is that those institutions are no longer helping to raise kids.
I think that's one of the hugest points of all of this is that when you look at a lot of schools that are successful or at least produce kids that score well on tests, which may not be the best measure of success, but it's the one that we use.
Yep.
And it certainly is far from perfect, but people who score, generally speaking, all else equal, someone who scores well on a test is probably set up better for life than someone who scores poorly on a test. All else equal. Of course, all else is never equal. But the ones who score well on a test, a lot of times we think, well, they must have gone to a good school. But when you start looking at the other non-school factors in their lives, it's probably as much those things that don't have anything at all to do with the education system that they had that drives their ability to do well academically. Parental support, a relatively tranquil home life, some sort of a community that's outside of the school, maybe connected with the school, but that comes along and supports this kid and these kids, and it's a community that can help raise a kid into a successful life, way more than a teacher, especially a teacher who has them for an hour a day. That may be great, and sometimes they make huge impacts on a child's life, but there's only so much one person can do with 20 kids an hour or whatever it is in the standard high school schedule.
No, that's right. And I think, I do think that the College Board's creation of the adversity score that they're adding to that, it's them trying to acknowledge that. Now, however, colleges and people use that, I think is going to be, left to be determined. But I think the idea that the things that we measure, going back to it, things that are easy to measure, College Board, obviously, that's all they do is measure how you answer certain questions. It's easy to do those things. What we don't recognize is what are we not seeing? What are we not capturing? Back to your question as far as what led us to do this. There's Chap Clark is a sociologist, and I think he's a pastor now, but he wrote a book, an ethnographic study of teenagers in a big public school in Southern California. And his analysis of it really was different. We have a lot of people that study adolescence from a clinical perspective. And of course, we know that as soon as you put an adolescent in a clinical context, you actually have lost the adolescent and all the fun. And so he did the ethnographic study of, no, I'm going to be with these kids in their school, in their lives, and try to make sense of what is the current adolescent experience. The title of his book to present this to educators and pastors and leaders was Hurt, because his conclusion to what is the I suppose existential experience of what an adolescent is in America is they are hurt, they are abandoned. There's a sense in which, and if you think about this, is where you start to realize that our collective adult sense of responsibility to kids and adolescents is out of whack. We don't we overstructure and manage their time so they have no variation of free time to be able to make decisions, but we market every piece of junk and food and things to them as if they're just someone that we can make money from. And so you have this weird sense of they know, the millennial generation gets a hard rap because they're this group that didn't grow up, and yet they get the hard rap from all of the adults who were the ones around them supposedly responsible to help them grow up. And so I think this idea of and just on an experiential level with kids is recognizing they're hurting. Even the most successful ones that are getting those A's and those great scores and getting those colleges, there is a sense in which they want to become who we're Christians, we say, who God has created them to be and to grow into that identity. And instead, they're busy doing homework 4 hours a night and cramming and trying to get test scores and a college admissions application that looks really good that's not them.
Right.
And so trying to connect who they are with their learning and their growing up is a big part of what Waterloo is.
I think the point that you make there, it makes me think back to my 8th grade geography teacher. I remember no geography. I'm vaguely aware that we are in Texas, which is in the southern U.S. I exaggerate, but you get my point.
Yeah.
But I remember one thing that he said, and so 8th grade for me would have been, I don't know, mid to late 80s, something like that. But he said, parents like to talk about kids your age and all the problems with kids your age and the stuff that you watch and and of course, this is the mid-'80s. It's a little different in 2019. But he said, you guys didn't make these ridiculous movies. You guys didn't make, this might be a little before Two Live Crew, but the AC/DC, whatever was the controversial music or band at the time. You guys didn't make any of this stuff. And I started thinking, I thought, well, that's kind of right. Of course, I was kind of a goody two-shoes. I didn't do any of that either, but I was pretty good at judging all my friends who did, and I had to kind of rethink, even at that age, maybe at our age we have to learn to take responsibility for things, but somebody's got to teach us.
Yeah.
I'm an 8th grader. I can barely take responsibility for putting on my shoes and have my socks matching. To ask me to be responsible for some of these bigger issues in life, we need some help on that. And the way we educate right now, including the way that the community around the student has kind of broken down, at least in a lot of cases, we're abandoning our duty to these kids. And we've got to come up with a way to reestablish fulfilling our duty to a next generation. It's trite and almost silly to say that the children are our future, but I was just with my wife's grandparents, and we're the children that were their future, and they rely on us now.
Yeah.
You were about to say something, Dr. Blosser, and I think I kind of cut you off.
I don't remember.
Okay. I got on a little rant there. So, Dr. Blosser, you mentioned that the system worked when it was designed and for a long time after. Is it simply technology that has changed to where it's not necessarily as effective as it used to be, or are there other factors at play?
I think there are lots of different factors. I think two of the big ones we've noticed, especially in the last 5 to 10 years maybe, but really the last 5 years, is that the invention of the smartphone and the ubiquitousness of it, that everyone has one in their pocket, it rendered a lot of what school was kind of obsolete, right? I mean, even when I was in high school, I didn't have a computer yet. Computers were kind of a new thing. So you read books and you took notes and you had to learn information. Well, education now, information's at your fingertips. So education now is no longer about simply imparting information. It's helping kids understand why that information is important. How is it relevant? How is it applicable? So I think the technology piece was definitely important. It's impacted their attention span. It's impacted my attention span, and I'm in my 40s. I mean, I used to be able to sit down and devour an entire book in an afternoon, and now it's hard for me to get through a couple of chapters. It has really damaged our attention span. So how much more so for them? I mean, my kids are what they call digital natives. They have grown up not knowing anything different. They've had screens in front of their faces since they were toddlers. And so if we have a hard time with it, we really have to think about what that's doing to their brains, how that is actually forming and shaping their brains in ways that are largely, I think, unintentional. I think the other piece to it that we saw was just the system worked for a long time because the outcomes were pretty guaranteed. If you worked hard, you got good grades, you were going to get into a good school. I mean, I applied to one college and got in, and now I don't know if I could get into my alma mater. So between the college admissions process became much more competitive, and Craig alluded to how kids they know what's going on. They're much more aware than we like to think that they are, and so they know it's a game. And in their hurt and in their disaffection, I think increasing numbers of young people are no longer willing to play that game. Because why would you? If the outcome is not guaranteed, why would you want to play that game when it's at the cost of your identity and your soul? I don't think I'm being too dramatic to say that.
The outcome's not guaranteed, and even if you get the
That's right.
outcome, it's empty.
It's empty.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, on that cheery note,
That's what you get when you have a medievalist in the podcast. Abandon hope, all you who enter here.
so if the world has changed and we are in front of a screen all the time, attention spans are getting shorter. It's affecting our brains, and it's affecting how our brains work and how long we can. And I'm the same way. With my attention span, I notice it getting shorter and shorter, and I'm not pleased with it. But is the world changing so that we don't need longer attention spans, or is this something we need to fight?
That is a great question, and my own personal wrestling with my attention span, or the dwindling resource that it is,
Because we do love our phones, we really do.
was I just kind of disrupted a little bit reading a book by Cal Newport called Deep Work. And there's a subtext to it. I don't think he says it in any single sentence, but the subtext that to me is screamingly obvious, and I think it answers the question as to why, yes, we actually do need to cultivate our attention, is that the nature of one of the aspects of our digital economy is that attention, if I can get your attention, then I can get money from you. Whether it's your eyeballs on a screen when there's advertisements going on, or the use of an app or a service or whatever it is. If I can get your attention, it's no longer the physical interaction and relationship that matters. It's the attention that I have on whatever it is that I'm doing. And the reality is that to create those things actually requires a command of my own attention. I have to take my attention away from you, who's trying to get it from me, for the sake of me creating something that will garner attention. And so there is this sense in which it's and there's a little bit of a zero-sum mercantile economy that I think is different in that it is a finite resource for each one of us. There are things that are infinite when it comes to resources on the digital thing, but our time, our minutes, our attention, our brain functioning capacities are finite. If I yield those to consuming information, it could even be good information. If I yield that, I don't have that back to create things, and that creating things may be intimacy with my family and close friends. It may be service to others. It may be the work that I do. But if I give my attention away, I don't have it to yield and develop things. And so I really do think that it is of the utmost importance for us to develop habits. And I think this is one of the things we realize is that really the ability to control our attention is a It is a cultivated, not just habit in the sense of it's a good habit that I do, and make sure I brush my teeth before I go off. It's like, no, this is something where I need to train my brain and myself to attend to things that are worthwhile when there are all sorts of things that are very powerfully designed with the help of psychologists, I think, when it comes to Facebook and others, to pull my attention away. So the long answer is yes. The short answer is yes, we need to.
So how does Waterloo address the problem of the shortening attention span, the pulls of the internet and social media, and this radically different technological world that we live in? How does Waterloo work with kids on that?
Well, one deep belief we have is that human beings are made to create things. And so it's not just more productive if you can take a hold of your own attention span. It's also a source of great joy and satisfaction in life. We are at our happiest and most fulfilled when we're making things of value for the world. And that was really one of the sources of our, we were really attracted to project-based learning because we like this idea that kids especially, we know that kids are fantastically creative. If you give them the time and the attention and the resources, they are capable of creating really wonderful things and learning more authentically through that process. So in designing our curriculum, one of the cornerstones is project-based learning. So between the schedule, where we have them in one class for 2.5 hours, and the focus on project-based learning, we are creating an environment for them where it is encouraged to create, where we're helping them, as Craig said, develop those habits and that discipline, but also learn the deep joy of being able to create things that are needed.
How do you take kids who are used to screens? They're 14 to 18 years old. They're digital natives. And because you have to, in order to discover that joy of creating, you have to break out of the inertia of the attachment to the screen. There's the uncertainty of engaging in the creative process because there's not a guaranteed outcome. There's not a guaranteed time when it will be done. There's not even a very good definition of what done means in a lot of these things. So how do you get kids who are in our culture to dive into that wholeheartedly and without reservation so that they can actually experience the joy of having created?
Good question. And I would
30 seconds.
I would say actually the core of it I can say is pretty short. Mentoring and relationships. Our experience is as attractive as digital connection. It is not as powerful as person-to-person relationships. One of the things that's fascinating about the adolescent brain is it is even more wired to be motivated and be productive when it is in social context than when it is not. So even the very idea of school actually does tap into their motivational centers, their drives. Now, when we put them in desks and rows and face away from each other, that kind of kills that. But now we know why they're always talking in class. But so to have them, bringing them into a context where they are facing each other, where they are interacting with one another, and it's part of the reason that we're kind of undoing the schedule is to create an environment where we can curate the experience and be able to say, okay, these are the places and the times when we're going to use technology. These are the places and times we're not. And we're going to do it in a sense that is very transparent. We're not saying we're doing this because we're the man and we have control and we're going to do this. It's in the context of the learning that you're going to do. When you're studying biology, you're not going to study this abstract biology. You're going to study the biology of a human being. Well, part of that is your psychology. Part of that is actually how your mind and body works. And as we equip kids, and I think that you can apply this to substance and all sorts of other things. When we equip kids with an understanding of how life works, and give them the opportunity to cast vision of who they want to become, what their passions are, what their interests are, what their the joy of actually contributing and serving others and doing other things. It taps into and kind of moves past the distractibility of the technology. Now, they're still going to have that when they go home,
sure.
But part of it is really kind of planting the seed of experiences. And we've experienced this because a lot of schools will try and control technology, and our experience is kids will begrudgingly say it's better to not have it around. We need you in these moments as we're trying to be able to develop to do that. But their attractiveness to that and the energy that they get, that we all get when we're interacting with one another, when we know that we're loved and supported by the people around us, that becomes kind of the juice of the motivation that kind of makes the distraction less distracting.
And in the context of that relationship, then there can be a certain amount of old-fashioned turn the devices off and go outside. I mean, my parents were big believers in that. I mean, I remember when I was a teenager, like, why can't we go to Disney World like normal people? Why do we have to go on these, historical vacations or nature parks? So I think that, and of course, now as an adult, I realized that was a tremendous gift. So we are in the middle of this wonderful city. There are lots of people and lots of resources literally at our doorstep. And so one of the exciting things about this model is that we can actually get kids out in the city, right? You can do biology outside. You can do ecology studies on one of the creeks. You can go to any of the museums that we have. You can go to living history reenactments. So there's a lot of making learning really experiential that is, I think in our experience, pretty appealing to the adolescent brain.
So you referenced that it's a project-based school. In concept, I get that, but when I start kind of digging down deeply in my own brain to what that means, I understand it in the abstract. It's harder for me to grasp in the concrete. Can you maybe describe what that's going to look like or how that's going to be implemented, and then how it's going to connect with, okay, we still do live in this system where they've got to have a transcript and they've got to, they don't have to get into college, but that's what everybody wants to do. And,
we want them
for
to.
Good reason.
We want them to, yeah.
So how do you connect sort of the abstract, okay, I understand as a project, to the actual work and then transitioning into a successful college and career?
So I think when most of us our age hear the word project or project-based learning, we think of the kinds of projects that we did in school where you're in a group with a bunch of people and one person ends up doing all the work, and then you have this poster and this presentation, and it's just honestly all kind of silly. And sometimes real learning happens there and sometimes it doesn't. And what we've discovered when we kind of dive deeply into the field of project-based learning is that there are a huge number of resources out there. There's an institute called the Buck Institute for Education. They have a fantastic website that has all kinds of resources for project-based learning. Because with project-based learning, the process is really important. In a lot of cases, the process itself is more important than the product that's produced. Now, as you follow the process, I think most of the time kids can come up with some really cool projects. We've seen a lot of impressive work that's come out of schools and programs that are doing project-based learning. So in terms of the learning that takes place, you do have to design your course and you have to help students design projects in such a way that learning is taking place. You want to talk about the transcript?
But before we do, because I do want to do that because I think it's, for obvious reasons, important. But can you give a couple of examples of the types of projects that either you've seen that others have produced and how it connects, or that are scheduled or planned for the upcoming Waterloo?
Well, we can talk about, I'll start by talking about some projects that we've learned about as we've been doing our research and talking to other educators. There's a group of Christian educators up in Toronto. They are affiliated with an organization called CASE, the Center for Advancement of Christian Education. And they have shared some projects that their students have done. One project was a 5th grade project. They were studying history, they were studying slavery, but instead of just taking a test or writing a paper at the end, the kids created their own slave narratives and created books and sold them, and all of the proceeds from that went to help fight human trafficking. Which is pretty impressive, right? 5th graders helping to fight human trafficking. That's amazing. And, hearing the kids' testimony and kind of watching them go through that process, it was really impressive what they could come up with. And all of the different things they're learning. They're learning history. They're learning language arts. They're learning about publishing and digital publishing and marketing. They went to the mall and they sold their books at a kiosk. I mean, all kinds of things came out of that for their learning.
Another example, and I believe this is what Dr. Swan, our chemistry teacher, is planning to do, is learning chemistry, each student, though, being connected with, making contact and building a relationship with a chemist in the city of Austin. And their project is to understand what that chemist does, and understand it in the context of the full field of chemistry that they're doing, and then develop a means of, and what that means is, whether it's a video or a lesson or a play or whatever it is, a means of informing local elementary students of what chemists do in the city of Austin, probably having to do with water purification more recently, because that seems to be a problem here.
Yeah.
But being able to, as we all know, trying to communicate something is when you realize, do I understand it or not? Trying to communicate it to someone that's actually on a lower level of understanding is even harder. And so the process of how do I actually help kids understand? And it might be one of those things where the value of it is just the level of, oh wow, there are cool things that happen here, or it might be, oh, there are more professions out there than the basic ones that I know. And if I'm the kind of kids that likes to get into chemistry, there are ways that I actually could do this in a way that contributes to my community. So it's looking for ways that they can do real work. The value of it may be minimal because they may crash and burn in the process. And that actually is a really important thing. One of the things that's happened with the increase in college competition is failure is not an option. On the transcript, and we can talk about that, kind of the segue for it, but failure is not an option. And so the learning experiences that teachers have to curate prevents them from having that very experience that we all know as adults is the thing you learn from the most. Part of what project-based learning allows is their ambition to try and accomplish something can be evaluated as a grade independent of the success of that project. I can understand chemistry, but I may have totally failed at communicating it to fifth graders. Okay, what did we learn through that? Well, I learned a whole lot of chemistry, and I learned a whole lot about my limits, preparation, project management, all the things that are going to have a greater value the next time I do a project.
Right. That's so I think one of the things about Waterloo, because I've heard you guys talk about Waterloo in other contexts, which is what made me interested in having this today. But at the end of each trimester, they have to present something to the world in some way. And is that going to be the same? Is it always going to... How do those presentations look?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we will, end of each trimester, we'll have an exhibition night, and the presentation of it really will be, it will depend a bit on what the project is. So if they were working towards something where they were creating a product, it certainly can be displaying and selling and promoting that product, and also explaining the process. If it's something where they did a production, it might be that we have kids who are trying to understand history, and their project is actually to write, produce, and perform a play. It could be that actually is the performance on that exhibition night. But regardless of whether it's something that they accomplished beforehand or it's something that actually culminates in that night, on that night, we invite family and friends, open it to the public for people to see what are these kids doing and for them to show off their work and their accomplishments on the level of motivation. And I think this is one of the pieces that's attractive to us with this model and this approach, as opposed to kind of the standard, how do I demonstrate my learning? I take a test, whether it's an essay or written, and I write it down, and my audience is one, it's a teacher. The whole thing is irrelevant ultimately except for the grade. In this public presentation of my learning, my identity is a little bit more in what I'm doing than just in an answer. And I'm a teenager that's kind of figuring out who my identity is. And so the pride, the desire, the sense of accomplishment is much greater than did I get 100 on that or not. And it becomes separate. And we've had experience with students doing kind of culminative capstone performance-based things. And the grade is never the important thing in those contexts. Their friends, their family, seeing what they know and what they're capable of becomes the thing that is most important. And so to habituate that, I guess, into the learning process, where really what real work is getting to a point of demonstrating, hey, I've created something of value and I want to see it. Or learning, I tried to create something of amazing value, and it's kind of valuable, but man, did I learn a lot. And realizing the freedom that comes in that to be able to say, wait, I want to live this kind of life where I'm trying to create things of value for the people around me and sharing it and not being afraid of it, not always working perfectly, because I believe in the bigger process and what I'm becoming in the process as well.
So how do college admissions people probably aren't coming to each of those end of trimester presentations.
We'll invite them.
But the one from the small liberal arts college up in upstate New York probably can't make the trip. So how do you persuade them that these students are qualified and will succeed in their college?
So I think we're idealistic educators, but we're also very deeply practical people. And we realized pretty early on, coming out of our own experience with helping kids go through the college admissions process, that the transcript is a really important piece of that process. So we designed a transcript that we say translates this amazing experience that in many ways is hard to describe or quantify into a document that is going to show the colleges not just the boxes they've checked with credits and credit fulfillment, which we have that, of course, but also all of the different kinds of experiences that they have had over the course of their high school career. Because we know, helping kids walk through the college process, that colleges really are interested in what kind of person are you? They have your test scores, they have your grades, but beyond that, they're really interested in kids who do have a sense of who they are and what they want to do in the world. So along with the courses and the interesting courses that we're teaching on the transcript, we'll also have descriptions of the kinds of projects that they did, which translate into very recognizable real-world skills that colleges find very attractive.
Yeah, I think one of the things with the transcript is it really doesn't say how you earned the grade. It just says that you earned the grade. And so there is great latitude in what is the best experience as I am studying and developing my skills and mastery everything. What is the best experience that we can have that will translate into an intelligible, understandable, translatable grade on a transcript? So we designed the transcript, honestly. We had iterations of it before we knew what the program was going to look like, because we knew what the end result needs to look like on one level for colleges. And then as Carol mentioned, the other piece that we have the opportunity, since our kids are doing things, we will have a section on it that helps them present what kinds of projects did I do over my 4 years at Waterloo? Was I creating businesses? Was I creating apps? Was I creating websites? Was I doing community service? What are the kinds of things? So the actual product kinds are represented in a way that represents that, and that becomes the immediate for a college admissions. Well, can I see the portfolio? And that opens the door for them to be able to access a portfolio, to be able to see the products that they've created.
All of the things that we know kids need to be able to show that they've done to get into college, kids in the traditional system are having to do that on top of their coursework and their schoolwork. We were able to redesign the entire program so that all of those things, the service, the athletics, all of that stuff can kind of be woven into what they're doing. It's not just piled on top of the homework that they have every night.
I suppose that's a product of not treating education as segmented and disconnected from the rest of life. Education and service are not two separate things. You can learn things while performing service, while creating something that's right. Valuable to somebody, or doing something for someone that's valuable for them, not merely because you have to figure out which bubble to fill in on a standardized test. But they do have to learn how to fill in the right bubble on a standardized test. And if they send in their transcript to an elite college or even mid-level college, and it has all these glowing things, and then they have a pitiful ACT or SAT score, the colleges are going to say, well, thank you very much. Good luck in your future endeavors.
Yes, they will. Yeah, so one of the things that in redoing the schedule, it opens up is we can, in those 12 weeks, 2.5 hours a day, 4 days a week, get in 20% more learning time than a student can. 6 classes all year long, 5 days a week.
You slipped in that 4 days a week.
Yes, I did.
Discussed yet.
So what that opens up, and this actually addresses a couple of different things that I, again, have seen develop culturally over time with teenagers. they have less structured time. They have, as Carol alluded to, there's what I do at school 8 to 3, and then I have my commitments when it comes to athletics, when it comes to work or internship or service, test prep, essay writing, and then my homework. And so we really do overstructure kids, which is great. We can get amazing performance from them, but there's a little bit of a false positive, and then they get to college, and besides saying, wow, there's more multiple choice than I know what to do with, they often will say, I also had way more free time that I didn't know how to plan my time. And so part of what the Friday allows us to do is they're still going to come to school, but it is, again, a curated time of what should you be spending time on in order to advance and work towards your goals. So it could be test prep. It could be tutoring in chemistry because there's some concepts that I didn't really get and I need some more time with Dr. Swan. It could be doing an internship. It could be we're actually in a really good place and we want to go down to Zilker Park and play Frisbee golf. We're going to help them make those decisions. The following work, we're going to help them evaluate, okay, how was the Friday use of that time? It might be for 3 of the 4 kids, Frisbee golf was awesome, and the other one's like, I really should have actually gone to that tutoring with Dr. Swan. Okay, so you made a little bit of a poor mistake on that Friday. What are you going to do this Friday? It's giving them the time to develop that. But one of the things that allows is, as there are periods of time, if we want them to be taking the December SAT, because that's the best time to be taking the SAT from a scoring standpoint, we're going to build in on those Fridays the test preparation to prepare them to be ready at the time to be able to do that. If there are some AP classes AP tests that students want to be able to score well on, we have a lot of experience in preparing kids to do well on those classes without having to take that exact curriculum. There's actually a little bit more freedom in that. Mm-hmm. We can take some time in the weeks and months before those AP tests in May to be able to help them get those scores. Because you're right, those easily quantifiable, measurable cross points are very important in the admissions process to be able to say what level of accomplishment are your kids at as they're coming out of your school.
Yeah, they need to be able to read, they need to be able to write, they need to be able to do math, and they need to be able to think. So it's very important.
So one of the benefits of having a podcast is I can have conversations with people because I can say, hey, come on my podcast. And that sounds better than, I find the things that you're doing interesting and I just want to talk to you about it. So I like talking about education because I think it's important and I have kids and I want them to be well educated and ready to go out into the world. But what I really care about, like everybody, I care about me. Mm-hmm. And as I've heard you in other contexts talk about what you're doing with Waterloo, I didn't just think, oh, wow, this is interesting for education. They've identified some issues in our education system that they're addressing and solving. Mm. I also saw that some of the issues and problems that you have found, and a lot of people have found, in the way our industrial model education works, apply very strongly to when I go into my office and sit down and I have to do work, and my computer's connected to the internet. And my internet, I don't know about yours, it has CNN, it has Fox News. I'm a political junkie, and I know there's not much political news out there, but more than I can read in a day. And then there's Twitter, and there's all of this kind of stuff. And the things that you're working on solving in the education system are in a lot of ways the same problems that I face as a mid-40s professional service provider. I face the exact same things. And the work that you guys are doing in creating Waterloo require the same sort of principles that you're getting ready to impart to high school kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So how have you guys navigated that transition? 'Cause you mentioned your smartphones, and Craig, I saw you have yours out. We all have.
Oh, you outed me.
This isn't on video, but I will narrate things. How do you navigate as an adult professional? Mm-hmm. We're not in factories turning out widgets. The things we do are creative. They take concentration and attention span. Yeah. How do you navigate that in this context of our digital culture?
in many ways, the project of building this has been a test case for project-based learning.
Craig calls it dog fooding.
Yeah, we call it dog fooding. You know, if you're the executive that makes dog food, you know that your food is really good if you're willing to eat it yourself. If I'm going to feed it, serve the dog, can I do that? So we take that and really, and there's a couple levels that I say this, not just on a level of building a school as a project similar to project-based learning, but the typical way of doing school is actually, again, from an employment standpoint, kind of follows the model of the factory. You have an administrator who's the overseer of teachers, who are the middle management overseers of children, and there's a sense in which the agency of decision making and ownership, honestly, often is a school board, or it's an administrative team, or it's a set of people above, and everyone else is to quote Pink Floyd, just a brick in the wall. Part of what...
We've gone from Shakespeare to Pink Floyd all in the same podcast.
Part of what we are intentionally trying to do, and this was from the very beginning of creating Waterloo, is make a teacher-owned school. Not a teachers are employed by a administrator who reports to a board who they own the school. Yes, there's the fiduciary responsibility on all those pieces, but from a decision making, from a being responsible for what we do, the teachers are the ones who are with kids. They're the ones with the closest sense of what's happening. They know their content, their knowledge. They know how students learn or don't learn on an intimate level. As there are changes in culture, they're the ones that feel it the most. They're kind of the canaries, so to speak. And so part of that has been, okay, how do we take our approach to our own role in what we do vocationally from being a employee, from being a kind of passive participant in the system that I work in, whatever that system is, to becoming a stakeholder? How do I say, okay, I need to accomplish X, and there are different ways that I can do that at kind of the least common denominator, or I can say, okay, how can I actually get done the most that I can because of the value that we're creating. So it's not just to check a box, but because we're creating value. And there's a little bit of a subtle change in the motivation where we're then coming up with looking at different techniques for doing that. Like, okay, using the Pomodoro technique with the tomatoes and the 25 minutes. It's like each of us trying to figure out. I don't think Carol likes tomatoes.
There were actual tomatoes that you wound up and tick, 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 tick. Needless to say, that was not my favorite technique. I don't work well that way.
But having and thinking of it not just in terms of accountability, but really in support. How do we support one another? How does my work feed into what Carol's work is doing, to what Bryce's work is doing? How is they supporting me? And creating a culture where that is the posture, and recognizing, okay, the technological changes. Like it may be Twitter or Facebook and Instagram now, but there may be something else that before we know it comes in and we realize, oh, wait, that's whittling away at who I am. And how much do we support each other in just talking through that and making the decisions of what I need to do differently, not because someone's telling me, but because this isn't who I want to be. And I think as adults, we have to do that as much as kids. And I think the more that we model that to teenagers, the more that they will have the freedom to realize, oh, adulthood isn't arriving. And I don't want to arrive because then I'm done growing. Like, oh, this thing keeps going. And I think kids actually need to see that from us.
Yeah.
That's so. Dr. Blosser, you clearly don't like the Pomodoro technique. It's like a 20-minute sprint and then a break. Is that right?
Yeah.
I've done it a long time ago. Why don't you like it?
Well, so I like the technique itself. I do think it's kind of interval training for the brain. I used to do a lot of running, and so you do your sprints so that you can develop your long-term endurance. So I do like this idea that you focus intensely for 20 minutes. And I think the actual mechanical tomato aside, I have found it a very useful technique. It's hard. I mean, everything that Craig has mentioned, it's been a year of real growth for me personally. Shifting from this, Craig is my boss and he tells me what to do, to, oh no, I have a stake in this and there's a problem and I have to figure out what the solution is. And I have the support. We have the support of the team and each other. But it really does take a mental shift to go from just tell me what to do to, oh no, I have to make this happen. And I think we've grown a lot as a team. We've grown a lot as individuals, but it's hard.
I don't know when I last did the Pomodoro type thing, and I didn't do it. I didn't have an actual ticking timer, but I just had a 20-minute timer set.
Dr. Swan got really excited and bought everybody a tomato.
That's what I mean, the actual ticking timer.
The thing I found about it was that it revealed to me the concept of inertia in my own attention span. Because when that timer went off, if I had actually focused for 20 minutes, I wasn't ready to unfocus. I had gotten into a groove. But the first 15 minutes of finding that groove were brutal. Because my brain would just, I think because I've unintentionally trained it, think, well, do I have an email? Maybe I have an email. Maybe it's an important email. Maybe it's an email I need to read right now and respond to right now. I wonder if somebody just tweeted something interesting. I wonder, maybe I should check. I'm going to check that and then come back. And overcoming that in my brain took me a while, which probably had I done this longer, I would get better at overcoming that inertia. But then once I kind of found that groove of concentration and attention span, then that timer went off, and I wasn't ready to stop. I wanted to keep going, and Lord knows how long I would have kept going until you're just exhausted with it, which may not be the best way to do it either. But experimenting with that kind of thing is I need to do more of it to be not just more productive, but I guess more productive, to make a better use of my time that's not always just lawyers are notoriously deadline driven.
The word that I find myself coming back to is just having agency, like being the agent of the time that I'm doing, as opposed to just allowing myself to follow the thoughts or productivity level, that inertia you were talking about. Like how do I actually practice, again, kind of owning my what I'm attending to. And it is really easy just to kind of let that happen and even get work done on the level of just responding to the stimuli of the to-do list or whatever it is, as opposed to really, again, it sounds kind of funny to say, but take control of my own mind and attend it and recognize it does take work. I mean, it's not developing a muscle, but there are neural pathways that I literally have to practice to get them to get strong enough to be able to do what I want it to.
And it does, when you get into that state you're describing, I think artists and creative people call it flow. When you're in the flow, right, then you realize, oh, I'm actually accessing parts of my brain that are probably the most creative parts of my brain, and it takes some work to get there, and I don't ever do it, but once you start doing it more regularly, I think it does become a little bit easier. And
the kids who attend Waterloo are going to get exposed to that early, before their brains have been as rewired. I mean, they're probably coming in. They're digital natives. They're coming in rewired to some extent. But the earlier they get wired back to a long attention span to get down deep into actual work, I think the better the brain can actually do that. So how lucky are they? I was talking to my wife just the other day, and I said it'd be kind of weird for a mid-40s guy with a law degree to go to high school, but I kind of wish I could.
You're not the first one to ask.
Not the first one to ask if you can come to the school.
So what's with the high school with all the mid-40s flunkies?
That might be a little creepy.
Yeah, that we probably ought to avoid that. So if people are interested in learning more about Waterloo, how do they find out?
Our website, waterlooaustin.org. There's a newsletter that you can sign up to that we send out every 2 or 3 weeks. We're also on all the social medias.
Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Waterloo School ATX.
Which I'm conflicted with the fact that we're in those spaces, but For now, that's where we are as well.
It's a certain irony of the whole thing that we're fighting the digital age, but we have to also be in the digital age.
Yes.
Indeed.
And so I will put in the show notes links to all of that. So my guests today have been Craig Dirksen and Dr. Carol Blosser of the Waterloo School in Austin. Thank you so much for being on the Personal Responsibility Lawyer.
Thank you, Michael.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure.
This episode of the Personal Responsibility Lawyer podcast is brought to you by my law firm, Levens Trosclair, where we use the civil justice system to hold people responsible for irresponsible choices when those irresponsible choices cause serious injuries and sometimes even death. We are personal injury trial lawyers, but we approach our cases a little differently than a lot of other lawyers who do the same basic kind of work. I really, really hope that you do not need us, but if you do need us, please call us before evidence gets lost. You can call us at 512-535-1649. Tell us you heard about us on the Personal Responsibility Lawyer podcast. You can also go to our website on the interwebs at www.ltlegalteam.com. That's L as in Levens, T as in Trosclair, legalteam.com. We are here to help. Thank you for listening to the Personal Responsibility Lawyer podcast. If you like what you've heard or if you've learned something interesting, please do me a favor and rate the show on iTunes. It really does help. You can get more information about this show, including the show notes, at my personal website, michaellevens.com. And now I have to do some disclaimers where I say stuff that you already knew, but I got to say it anyway so that I keep the state bar happy. This podcast is not legal advice. You listening to this podcast does not make me your lawyer or you my client. Neither does it make any of my guests your lawyer. If you want me to be your lawyer, contact my office. If I can represent you, we will execute a written contract stating the specific terms under which I agree to represent you. Did you really need me to tell you that? I really, really hope not. Also, I am not certified by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization as a personal responsibility lawyer because they don't know what that is. They also have not certified me in any other areas of specialty that they actually do recognize. I think that does it for disclaimers. For Levens Trosclair and the Personal Responsibility Lawyer podcast, I am Michael Levens. We'll see you next time.